folks on Zoom. Oh,
4 o'clock in the morning this morning.
that used to happen to us all the time.
4 o'clock in the morning. I literally had a heart attack and also fell out of my bed.
Oh,
onto
no.
my desk, and I'm very used to this job. Very scary.
Well, and like the really scary thing when people pull the fire alarms is that people get used to them. So I was an RA when I was in college,
Well, see,
and we would have people, they're loud, but they were pulled so often we'd actually have people sleep through them. So part of our job as an RA was to like pound on everybody's door and make sure they were awake.
Because we were like, what is, we were all just mostly confused with what exactly was happening and why the fire alarm was going.
Yeah, actually, my first year as an RA, I ended up referring one of my residents to become an RA because he took off after the person who pulled it. I was like, well, I don't know that that's the best behavior, but clearly he's invested. So he ended up being an RA the next year. Checking in with them. We're online today. Okay, great. And then I'm gonna go ahead and take in-person attendance. All right, so Mia and Deja are both here. Nora, finally remember your city. Abby, Sarah Ellis, and Miriam, Brennan, Lauren. I'm starting to get it. Wow, I got like the first 10 without it. Oh, we're gonna get there. Micaiah, Lyric. Thank you for it's here. Alex that's over there. India. India has been online, just signed on online. Good morning, India. All righty. Good morning, good morning. All righty. All right, so Lyric. Awesome. I'm just doing attendance. Didn't mean to freak you out. Sorry. All right, Lorraine. Awesome. Kevin. Saw you already this morning. Sydney. Awesome. Alex. Sarah. Melissa is often on Zoom, but isn't today. And then Grace. Okay, we're getting there. I got about half of y'all without actually looking at your hands. So hopefully, eventually I can stop doing this. I might just do it all semester if my brain doesn't work, and I apologize in advance. It has nothing to do with any of you. Everything to do with my own little brain not functioning. All right, so obviously we're like a scooch behind, but that's okay. That happens a lot in this class because we just get excited about stuff. And so that's why our schedule is sort of tentative. So today what we're going to do is continue our lecture. There's an activity you'll do about motivation. And then what we'll do on Friday is finish up our lecture, talk about emotion, do a small activity about emotion, and then we will have a review. Then Monday is the day that I'll pass out the exam in class. So Zoom folks, on Monday, you do need to come in to get the exam because it will be paper. And then I will be here to answer questions about the exam. And then you will have until Wednesday at the start of class time to turn it in. So really just, you'll probably all turn it in Wednesday at the start of class time because you don't have to trek over here in between. So Friday, finish up, review, Monday, get the exam. The exam is due Wednesday in class. Alrighty, gonna go ahead and minimize so that we have some more space to see everything and start our slideshow. Last night I went through and I updated the criteria for these disorders. Normally I'm pretty good about remembering to upgrade. Yeah.
So this is an intern psych class on the exam, so I have to know about the exams for it. Like, in depth about them.
So, the questions will pull from the slides and the readings. Essentially, they'll be pretty obvious in general, if that makes sense. But remember, it's open book, open note, open PowerPoint slides. It's just not open friends. So yeah, I try to make them obvious. I may even pull questions from your Connect assignments online. I almost always have questions from your Explain It to the Media quizzes. Oh, my total bad. I made the Explain It to the Media quiz available for this chapter. It's technically due today, but get it in whenever, since I only gave you like 24 hours and I normally try to give you more time of that. Fully acknowledging there are times when I am not on top of things, and thanking you all for your patience with me. But yeah, so what we're looking at here, it is an intro psych class, but is, general concepts, ideas. So am I gonna ask you, how many times a week you have to binge in order, to be qualified for bulimia? No, but I might ask, a little description of someone with an eating disorder and which disorder would they have.
When you update the slide, at least for me, when I click on the lecture notes and go to the slides, I don't get the add one.
Yes, so that's actually a really good point. And what I'll try to do after class today is I'll put the link to, because I uploaded them to Google Slides, but I uploaded them on Blackboard before I did that. And so I'll go through and I'll put the Google Slide links to all of them in Blackboard. That's a really helpful tip. Thank you. And I usually do that. And again, just haven't this year. So again, thank you for your patience with me as I sort of navigate this new world of, it used to be my slides were my slides were my slides, and now there are different versions of them. So yeah, again, the exam will be written to be taken in sort of a normal class period, but you will have 2 days to do it, and you'll have access to all your information. So you can definitely use my PowerPoint, you can use assignments, you can use your Explain It to the Media quizzes, all that good stuff. I just ask that it's not open friends, just to collaborate, because I want to see what you all know and how you all are working with the information. Alrighty, any other questions about logistics of things going forward? I'd recommend, if you haven't started Connect assignments yet, they might be a really nice way to review, say over the weekend. And at least I tried to make them fun and interactive, so. All right, so these are the current symptoms, diagnostic criteria for anorexia nervosa. So we've done away with this, like you have to be less than 85% of your weight, simply because people's bodies are so different, right? So they're restricting food, they're restricting nourishment, and that leads to low body weight. There's also an intense fear of gaining weight, even when they are underweight. So that picture we looked at the other day where they're seeing themselves as being bigger than they are, right? That's very accurate. Or sometimes we don't see this fear of weight gain, which is really interesting. This is something they changed up. They used to just always assume everyone is afraid of gaining weight. But sometimes either people aren't aware they have this fear or they just simply don't, but they're still engaging in behavior that doesn't allow them to gain weight. And then one of the biggest factors that's at stake in both bulimia and anorexia is this disturbed body perception, the undue influence of weight or shape on self-evaluation. So these folks, and this often happens with people with anorexia nervosa in particular, they're often perfectionists, they're getting excellent grades, they're doing well, whatever they're doing. But in their mind, they're horrible, worthless people because they're not at their full weight, which, as you can imagine, is often really unrealistic. And they'll deny the seriousness of their low weight. Oh, it's no big deal. So as you can imagine, this can lead to a lot of medical problems. And so these can include things like cardiovascular issues. One of the reasons that I got really interested in eating disorders is when I was in college, I read an article about a 20-something-year-old ballet dancer who had died of a heart attack. And it was because of her anorexia nervosa, because it puts a lot of strain on the heart. And I used to dance and I was just like, I can't believe, like, this is mind-boggling. They often have low blood pressure, low body temperature, and they'll have lowered metabolism. It's a slowed metabolism, so that makes it even harder for them to lose weight. Essentially, your body wants to keep you alive, right? So it will do whatever it can to try to like prolong the whatever small calories you're giving it. Fluid and electrolyte complications. Sometimes these folks will not even consume water because if you are really not eating anything, you can see on your body when you drink water, and that is aversive to them. Dental issues, particularly if they purge. So some people with anorexia do throw up their food. And anytime you're throwing up a lot, you're bringing up acid from your stomach, right? So it can actually cause a lot of cavities. I had a client with bulimia nervosa who had never had a cavity in her life and then had multiple cavities in one appointment when she developed bulimia. Gastrointestinal issues, it really just messes with your stomach and intestines' ability to process things. Dehydration, again, because they're not drinking water. Lanugo is really interesting. So this is related to that low body temperature. So lanugo are little downy hairs that will grow on your body where you don't normally have body hair. Infants are actually born with these. The whole idea is to keep the body warm. So to keep our body temperature regulated, we do actually need a certain percentage of body fat, right? And in people with anorexia nervosa who don't have that, they'll actually redevelop these little downy hairs, and that's the body's effort to try to keep them warm. They often wear like layers of clothes for the same reason, giant hoodies, things like that. If they're not on the pill, and if there's someone who menstruates, we will see the cessation of the menstrual cycle, which can lead to all sorts of problems. And then osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, even at young ages, due to these things. So this is one of the statistics I think is sort of most important to realize about eating disorders. Is people be like, oh, these are a niche thing. They don't happen that often. Why should we care? Anorexia nervosa has the highest mortality rate among any mental illness. So higher than depression, higher than PTSD. And it's because not only, unfortunately, do you have people who starve themselves to death, but also there's an unfortunately high rate of death by suicide among these folks as well. All right, so bulimia nervosa. You're gonna binge eat, as we talked about in our research methods lecture, eating a large amount of food in a short amount of time with a sense of loss of control. Feel like you can't stop. And then they'll purge in a variety of ways. This might include vomiting, that's what we tend to think of, but it could also be abuse of laxatives. So laxatives, if you're not familiar, basically make you have diarrhea. They just wash everything out the back end. Diuretics are water pills. And they basically make you lose water weight. Fasting, extreme fasting. This is why a lot of eating disorder researchers and clinicians are really anxious about the dieting trend for intermittent fasting, right? Because for not for everybody, but for some people that may push them into an eating disorder. But an example here, I had a client who would challenge herself to see how long she could go without eating every day. So she might not eat till 3 p.m. And then not only are you experiencing negative symptoms because of that, but it also makes you more likely to binge simply because your body's just hungry, right? And it's telling you to consume those calories. Similar to anorexia, you have that self-evaluation based on weight and shape. And typically people with bulimia are at or above normal weight. So this is just the accurate description for this didn't change much from DSM-4 to DSM-5. The main difference is it used to be binging and purging twice a week. And the research showed there's no difference between people who do it twice a week and once a week. So they walked it back down so that more people could be captured by that diagnosis. And again, I will share these after class. If you don't get all the new stuff down, no worries. So binge eating disorder is a disorder that for 20 years was in a experimental diagnostic category, like an appendix of the DSM. And it was like, this is something that might be a thing, but it needs more research. And then when they made the DSM-5, they said, yeah, this is its own disorder. And that's not surprising because when I was in grad school in the aughts, so 2004 to 2010, we were using this diagnosis quite a bit. And so essentially, and the binges are once a week, apologies. I thought I updated that. Let me fix that real quick. So the binges are once a week, similar to bulimia. And again, we're looking at least 6 months. It's not like you've done it once, right? We want to make sure we don't over pathologize people. That's a big thing we want to do. And then they have a lack of control, just like people with bulimia, but they do not engage in the compensatory behavior. So they're not purging in any way. So it's really interesting because I came up with these interesting criteria about binge episodes that only apply to binge eating disorder. And I feel like we could put these in bulimia and it would be just as accurate. But again, what do I know? But yeah, they're distressed about it and they're doing it at least once a week. All right, there's also this category called OSFED, other specified feeding and eating disorders. And this is basically stuff that doesn't have its own diagnostic name, but that we know is a thing people do that really can be damaging. My favorite of these is atypical anorexia. It's hilarious they call it atypical because it's much more common than the traditional diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. And this is all the symptoms of anorexia nervosa, but you just aren't underweight. And so we see this quite a bit in folks who are dieting, regardless of weight. Sometimes they get pushed over into essentially anorexia nervosa. I remember I did a lot of pre-surgical evaluations for people who were undergoing bariatric surgery. And one of my supervisors had a client that this is what happened after she had her surgery. She developed anorexia, but couldn't technically be diagnosed with it because she was still obese, right? So I went to a whole bunch of sessions about this at a conference I went to this past summer. And the field is really starting to acknowledge more that like atypical isn't actually atypical. And we need to be treating these people and making sure, because they can suffer all the same health effects. Purging disorder is where you do not binge, but you still purge. And sometimes people with purging disorder will purge everything they eat. So they're vomiting after in like a snack. You will also sometimes see people who are like sub-threshold for bulimia or binge eating disorder. So they're not meeting that once a week criteria, but it's still interfering with their life. And there's a lot of people who fall into this OSFED category. So our existing diagnoses aren't necessarily capturing everybody. And that's certainly the case with other areas of psychopathology as well. For example, the personality disorders, I believe our existing diagnoses for personality disorders do not capture 60% of the people with personality disorders. So psychology is a young evolving field, as we've talked about. We are trying to get better about finding criteria that accurately diagnose people. All right, there are obviously other types of motivation besides just hunger. So the need for achievement is a big one that I think a lot of people in college in particular can relate to, right? And so there's this desire to attain a difficult goal, a difficult but desired goal. Graduating college, maybe getting a scholarship, things along those lines. And a couple different things come into play here. One is mastery. So mastery is a focus on acquiring knowledge and developing skills. So a focus on acquiring knowledge and developing skills. And so mastery wouldn't be about, I want to make sure I get A's in all my classes. Mastery would be about you're satisfied and excited and motivated by just learning the material, mastering the material, mastering new skills, right? And then performance is that competitive focus, where you are maybe competing against yourself to get a better grade, or maybe you're competing against other students, right? Everyone's known that person. What'd you get on the test? Oh, well, I got 2 points better. You're like, good for you. I don't care. But some people really do care, and this can be really toxic. You can imagine when people really pit against each other. But sometimes this is also, if it's sort of a friendly competition, this can be motivating in a good way. There's also sexual motivation. So we look at sexual cues. Sexual cues are any stimulus that becomes associated with sexual desire. So genital touch, orgasm, that can become a conditioned stimulus and motivate sexual activity. So most of these are things we typically think of, like touches on certain areas of the body that we call like erogenous zones. But for some people, this can end up being things that we wouldn't normally think of. And sometimes we refer to these as fetishes, right? People who are turned on by feet, right? Or certain garments, right? Yeah, and like in some cases, as long as it's not hurting anybody else, I guess don't yuck somebody else's yum. But in other cases, obviously, it can be pathological and problematic. I think the most problematic, scary one is pedophilia, right? It's not socially acceptable to be abusing children because you have somehow associated sexual cues with them. Sexual scripts are the ways we learn to respond in sexual situations. And so these are dictated usually by our early experiences, but also a lot by the media, right? So like a lot of people, especially in this day and age with the internet so readily accessible, learn about sex through porn. And porn is not always the most accurate description of what happens in sex. Like, sorry to like burst anybody's bubble, we felt that way, right? It's not, everyone's not just ready when you walk in the room, right? And willing to go. And so this can actually lead to problems for folks who think that's the only way to be sexual, right? But we know that both learning and genetics affect our sexual behaviors. And sex has been studied scientifically for at least since the 1940s by a guy named Kinsey. And in fact, there is the Kinsey Institute still that still studies sexuality. So he interviewed 17,000 Americans about their sexual behavior. So he wasn't joking around. He really wanted to get in the trenches and figure out what's going on with people. Kinsey also figured out that many behaviors are widespread that were considered taboo, or they thought only deviant people engaged in them. So for example, oral sex. Kinsey showed that like a lot of people were engaging in oral sex, but it was thought like, oh, you don't do that because it's non-procreative, right? So that was really interesting to learn about. And he published 2 different books, one about men, one about women. He really looked at like rates of homosexuality, for example, and found again that was much more common and not deviant. The National Health and Social Life Survey in the 90s, again, interviewing a big sample, not as big as Kinsey. Kinsey sort of made the interviews his life's work, but doing this many interviews is still very time consuming. It's over 3,000. And they interviewed adults. They also found that there was an increase in the number of folks under 18 who were sexually active, and a declining age of the first sexual encounter. Masters and Johnson, their research was in like the 60s, 70s, and they really focused on observing sexual behavior. So if anyone's seen the series Masters of Sex, that's Masters and Johnson. And they would have people consensually come into the lab, and they would actually put like sensors on them to see what's happening to heart rate, what's happening to breathing, things along those lines. They actually developed a camera so they could insert vaginally to examine female orgasm. Like they were the first people to look at this. And as you could imagine, in the fairly buttoned up 60s, right? This wasn't necessarily received that well, but it's really influential on our ideas about sexuality today. So they observed and recorded these physiological patterns of people engaging in sexual activity. So sometimes it was consensual sex, sometimes it was just masturbation. And they discovered how people actually reacted during sex. And they came up with this idea of a sexual response cycle, that you have to be aroused, you have to actually be interested in sex, right? And then there's a plateau before you orgasm, and then resolution. And they said that men and women were similar in their response. They were sort of the first people to say this. A lot of people before this were thinking about women being cold, frigid, not actually enjoying sex. And they found that no, women might respond more slowly, but they go through the similar pattern and could even remain aroused longer. And a big contribution that Masters and Johnson made was the size of your genitals was generally unrelated to any aspect of sexual performance. So size does not matter. All righty. So this is your assignment, and this is an individual assignment, and you're not going to have to turn this in. This is for yourself. But go ahead and go to this tiny URL. There's also a link under in-class assignments on Blackboard if that's easy for you. And it's going to ask you questions about your personal motivation in general and for this class. So I'll check in with y'all to see where you're at after 5 minutes. It might take 10. And then I'll have you sort of turn to the people around you and share some of this. And if anyone just wants to write it down, hang on, what I'll do is I'll copy this tiny URL on the top of the assignment itself. Okay, what just happened? Oh, I know what just happened. It copied in white. Yeah. There we go. But if anyone just wants to like write it on a piece of paper, you can feel free to use this. And folks on Zoom, you can also go ahead and do this. And check this out for yourself. I'll go ahead and throw the link in the chat for y'all too. Actually, I'm gonna go grab my laptop and put the Google Slides on right now. How are folks feeling? Need more time, so we're clear on your own? Who needs more time? We'll just do show of hands. A few folks. If you're done, go ahead and just turn to the people around you and chat through sort of what works for you, what works for them. See if you can give each other any ideas about what might help you stay motivated.
I said, I know we need to get them on that. It's like it on TV. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Recipients and you can take notes. I said that's it. Just means I really know right now. We turn this in.
Nope, it's just, I'm gonna give you credit for being here. This is not just for you.
Last time I felt it.
Take another minute or two to chat with the folks around you, and then I'll ask a couple groups or a couple people to share what works for you. Alrighty, I'm guessing by the silence that we feel like they've adequately discussed, which is awesome. Alrighty, so what kind of goals did y'all come up with for yourselves for this course for the semester? And Zoom folks, feel free to participate by typing stuff in the chat. To get an A? Yeah, that would be a great goal. Yeah. Right, yeah, I mean, like, what the heck is psychology, right? I think that's a really great goal. All right, what are the kinds of motivations that y'all talked about? Who thought about intrinsic motivation? Just show of hands. The motivation from within yourself. Okay, a few people. Who thought about extrinsic motivation? Show of hands. All right, a few more. Yeah, so for some people it is that external grade, or maybe even thinking about if I don't get a good grade, who in my life will be unhappy, right? Maybe if I'm an athlete, I won't be able to play my sport, right? You know, my parents might be unhappy. Yeah.
So what's the difference between intrinsic and
Good question. So you can have intrinsic conscious or intrinsic unconscious. So intrinsic comes from inside you. Conscious is you're aware of it. Unconscious is you just don't even realize that's your motivation. So you could have unconscious extrinsic, and sometimes we see that for folks who unfortunately are in, like, let's say, an abusive relationship, right, or are being abused by family members, where their motivation is like pleasing that person, but they might not even realize it, because when you're in a traumatic situation, your brain actually tries to protect you. And it does that by sort of squishing stuff out of your awareness, what we call repression. Yeah, really good point. All right, what are some of the behaviors y'all are going to engage in to achieve these goals? Taking notes is a huge one, yeah. Asking questions, please ask questions. I don't know that y'all aren't understanding something unless you ask. I know in the past, when I've done a variation of this assignment, folks have said they're going to like try to study more throughout the semester. So like review their notes maybe once a week or something like that, or some people have said after every class. You know, or just simple things like I'm gonna set aside time to get my assignments done, right? And some people will actually schedule that on their calendar, like it's an appointment, like it's a meeting, like, okay, you know, Friday at 1, I don't have any classes, I don't have anything else, I'm gonna knock my Connect assignments out, so I don't have to worry about them over the weekend. They put it on their calendar, they get it done during that time, and then they can enjoy it. All right, what are examples of times in the past when you felt really motivated? Yeah. So if you have a particular sport, right, working out for that. Yeah, I was one of those dance moms kids. And we would train for nationals in the summer. And so it was really intensive, you know, and like we weren't in school, so our dance teacher got us all day. And yeah, don't miss that part of it. For some of you, it might have been, you know, crunch time before you graduated high school, right? Thinking about getting all those grades in. Or for other folks, it might have been other activities you participated in. So I participated in forensics, which is public speaking, when I was in high school, and my junior and senior years, I was doing pretty well. So I made sure that I practiced my speech and I was ready and really motivated at various events. So yeah, those are all great examples. And again, this is something to think about for yourself in terms of like, how can I harness what I know about motivation to help myself do a little better? Or keep doing what I have been doing that worked. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and reshare, and we'll spend our last 10 minutes or so here talking about the start of our emotions section. And then we'll finish that on Friday, and we'll do an activity related to emotion as well. All right, so emotion has 4 intersecting components. So we have physiological arousal, and this is not, I know we just talked about sex, but this is not necessarily sexual arousal. This can be when you're excited about something, when you're in the heat of the moment about something, when you're stressed about something, right? And your heart races, and there's a part of your nervous system we're gonna go over called the autonomic nervous system that kicks in, and it gets you ready to do whatever you need to do. So that's physiological arousal. Cognitive interpretation. Oh, sorry, interpretation. Sorry, it's misspelled in my notes, so I had a minute. Is our conscious recognition and appraisal, interpretation of our situation. So we're kind of looking at what's going on around us, and we kind of make a conscious decision how we're going to react to that. Right? So let's say you're up for an award, but so is your best friend, and you win the award, right? You might want to just like jump all over the place and be really excited, but you might decide to kind of temper your emotional reaction to be respectful of your friend, right? Other, you know, simple things, just like when you're at a funeral, even if you weren't particularly a fan of that person, it's not particularly sad that they died. That can happen sometimes, right? Not like dancing on their grave, literally, right? Just being respectful of the other mourners. Or, you know, good things too, you know, not being afraid to show positive emotions to help a friend, things along those lines. There are also our subjective feelings. And these relate to our memories of how we felt in the past about similar situations. And this is why sometimes something can catch us off guard and make us really emotional because it brings up something related to the past, right? And it sometimes really depends on context of what's going on around us. I'll give you an example. My daughter's favorite movie is Encanto. We have watched that movie at least 20 times, maybe going on 100, I don't know, right? And so a lot of times now, even though I like the movie, I like the songs, I kind of tune out because I've seen it, I know it, right? But if I really pay attention, every single time I get emotional at the end because one of the main characters, Mirabelle, has just been through so much and her family finally recognizes that. And it's really just touching. So those subjective feelings come back up for me. And sometimes those will draw on things we've experienced in the past, times that we haven't felt validated, for example. And then there's behavioral expression. That's what we actually do to show our emotion. You know, are we jumping up and down? Are we crying, smiling, shouting, acting out physically when we feel mad, things along those lines. You know, people that kick walls, things along those lines, right? And emotions help us to respond to the important situations around us and then to convey how we're feeling and our intentions to others. So they help us respond to these important situations and to convey our intentions, our feelings to others. And again, we're not always going to have the same reaction to a scenario that other people do, right? So like Queen Elizabeth's death, right? A lot of folks are really mournful about that. And I fully recognize that she was a really long-term leader and respected because of that. But other people are bringing up like her continued involvement in settler colonialism and the damage that was caused by that, right? And you can sort of hold both those things as a single person or as a person feel more mad or relieved at this point versus feeling sad. And it's okay to have those distinct reactions, right? Even within yourself, something we talk about in psychology is dialectics, that it's okay to feel like more than one way about something at the same time. And then we have physiological arousal. And that is a big part of emotion, as we mentioned. So I mentioned the autonomic nervous system. And it's called autonomic because we don't have to consciously control it. It just does. Our brain just does these things as long as we haven't gotten in its way in any way, shape, or form with drugs or things that might slow us down. And so we have the sympathetic nervous system, and this is what arouses, again, not sexually necessarily, but gets us more aware, attuned, ready to react. And then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's what sort of brings us back down. It calms us, it brings us back to baseline. So you can see in the sympathetic nervous system, blood flow to the brain is going to increase. It's going to get you thinking more about what's going on. Whereas in the parasympathetic nervous system, again, it's going to decrease it, bring it back down to baseline. Your pupils might dilate, get bigger during a sympathetic nervous system activation. In the parasympathetic nervous system, they're going to constrict back down again to normal. Your breathing rate will increase. This is to get more oxygen throughout your body, particularly in case you need to react to something, sort of a fight or flight situation, right? Whereas as the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, your breathing will go slowly. Same thing with the heartbeat. The heartbeat is trying to pump that blood around your body. But when that parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, it'll slow back down to normal levels. Skin perspiration goes up when that sympathetic nervous system is in place. This is why when you're really nervous, sometimes like your hands get clammy, right? Or you just find yourself like sweating a lot and you're like, I hope no one stands close enough to smell me, right? So that'll decrease again when that parasympathetic nervous system kicks back in. And again, this doesn't always have to be anxiety related. It can just be like you're running around getting ready in the morning. Like, I don't know if anyone else has this. I've talked to other parents in particular who experience this, that like, I am like drenched in sweat sometimes by the time I get my daughter in the car seat in the morning. And it's not like a strenuous workout. It's just like there are so many things to remember and so many little things to do. In the situation where the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, your digestion actually decreases because your body's basically saying, we can do that later. Let's put our energy in other parts of the body that are more important right now. And so that's going to kick back in when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks back in. And then our adrenal gland activity, this relates to hormones and other chemical responses throughout the body. That's going to increase, particularly the stress hormones like cortisol. And then those are going to be inhibited when we get into the parasympathetic nervous system. Alrighty, we will end there for today, and we'll finish off with emotions on Friday. So everybody have a great couple days, and I will see you then. And thanks for joining us on Zoom, folks.